A chance encounter. David Lawson shuffled along the city streets, each step heavy with exhaustion. His shoes, once sturdy, were now cracked, with the soles barely holding on. It had been another freezing night under the bridge, and the morning air nipped at his face like shards of glass. Newark wasn't a city of hope for him anymore. It was a place of survival, a jungle where every day was a struggle to stay warm, fed, and safe. The memories of his former life still haunted him, though he tried to push them away. There was a time when David had been someone with purpose. As a master woodcarver, he had owned his own shop, crafting intricate designs from mahogany and oak. His work was well regarded, even featured in galleries. But the life he cherished unraveled in ways he never imagined. It had all started when his daughter Maya was diagnosed with a rare heart condition. The medical bills devoured their savings, and as they tried to fight for her life, everything slipped through their fingers. After Maya's death just weeks before her 5th birthday, the house became silent, too silent. His wife Angela, shattered by grief, drifted away emotionally until one day she left without a word, taking the last remnants of their life together. David spiraled. The vibrant dreams that once fueled him crumbled to dust. Work became impossible, the shop closed, and soon after, the bank took their home. With nowhere to go and no one left to call, David ended up on the streets, a place where even memories felt too heavy to carry. Now each day felt like a slow crawl toward nothing. He'd wake, search dumpsters for scraps of food, and scavenge for odd jobs that barely kept him alive. His heart beat out of habit, not hope. On this particular morning, hunger gnawed at him with an intensity he couldn't ignore. The few coins he had were only enough for a vending machine snack, but even that felt like a distant luxury. David passed storefronts, catching glimpses of people in warm coats, holding steaming cups of coffee, and rushing to jobs that gave their lives direction. No one noticed him. No one ever did. As he turned a corner, something unusual caught his eye. There, lying on the sidewalk like a misplaced treasure, was a sleek leather wallet. It didn't fit into the grimy landscape of Newark, a polished, expensive thing that belonged somewhere far from these streets. David froze. His pulse quickened as his eyes darted down the empty street, half expecting someone to come running to claim it. But no one appeared. The wallet sat there, untouched and waiting. For a moment, he stood still, torn between hunger and guilt. His stomach groaned, louder this time, reminding him he hadn't eaten in over 2 days. The temptation was overwhelming. With trembling hands, he bent down and scooped up the wallet, glancing quickly around to ensure no one was watching. The leather felt smooth under his calloused fingers, soft and unfamiliar, like a memory from a different life. David's breath hitched as he opened it, revealing neat stacks of $100 bills. There had to be at least $1,000 inside, maybe more. Behind the cash were credit cards and an ID tucked into a side pocket. The name on the card read, Charles Albright. The address listed was from the Upper West Side of Manhattan, a place as distant to David as the moon. What was someone like Albright doing here in Newark? He imagined the man, probably wealthy, strolling confidently through a world of privilege, unaware of the struggles people like David faced daily. David exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the wallet in his hands. This was more money than he'd seen in months, maybe even a year. The hunger gnawed at him, making it difficult to think clearly. He could use the cash to buy a hot meal, maybe rent a motel room for a night to escape the cold. He could even buy new clothes, clean himself up, and try to find steady work again. But then, guilt crept in, sharp and unforgiving. He wasn't a thief. At least, he didn't want to be. Life had beaten him down, but it hadn't taken everything. He still had his principles, didn't he? David squeezed his eyes shut, trying to drown out the voice of temptation whispering that no one would miss a little money. Albright wouldn't even notice it was gone. Just $20. That's all I need, David told himself. A meal, just one good meal. His hand shook as he pulled a $20 bill from the wallet and slipped it into his pocket. The shame came instantly, like a knot tightening in his chest. He stared at the remaining cash in the wallet and whispered, "I'll give it back. I'll return the rest. I promise." With the decision made, David shoved the wallet deep into his coat pocket and turned toward the nearest diner. He'd get a hot meal, just this once, and figure out how to return the wallet afterward. It wasn't stealing, not really, just borrowing for survival. The warm scent of fried food hit him the moment he stepped into the small diner. It was modest, with cracked vinyl booths and a flickering neon sign in the window. The kind of place that welcomed anyone, regardless of who they were. David slid onto a stool at the counter, his body trembling from hunger and cold. The waitress, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Kathy, approached him. "What can I get you, hon?" she asked, her voice warm despite her tired expression. David hesitated. It had been so long since he'd ordered a meal that he felt almost embarrassed. Just a burger," he rasped. "And some fries. Water, too." Kathy scribbled the order down and called it out to the cook. Within minutes, a steaming plate of food was placed before him. David stared at it, feeling a lump form in his throat. It was just a simple burger and fries, but to him, it looked like a feast. His hand shook as he picked up the burger and took a bite. The warmth and flavor exploded in his mouth, and he fought back tears. For a moment, he let himself enjoy the meal, savoring each bite like it was the first thing he'd eaten in years. But even as the food filled his belly, the weight of the wallet in his pocket grew heavier. The stolen $20 bill burned like fire against his conscience. When the meal was over, Kathy placed the check in front of him with a soft smile. "That'll be $12.50, honorable." David pulled the crumpled $20 from his pocket and placed it on the counter. Kathy took it without a word, making change and handing him back the coins. "Take care of yourself, okay?" she said gently. David nodded, murmuring a quiet thanks as he slipped the change into his pocket. He stepped out into the cold night air, the warmth of the meal still lingering in his stomach, but unable to melt the guilt that gnawed at him. He knew what he had to do. The wallet needed to go back to its owner, and he needed to find a way to replace the $20 he had taken. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the kind of man he wanted to be. For the first time in a long while, David felt something stir within him. It wasn't hope, exactly, but it was close. A flicker of determination to make things right, no matter how hard it would be. "Tomorrow," he told himself, "tomorrow, I'll start making things right." But the night was long, and the journey ahead would be anything but easy. A choice that defines a man. The smell of last night's burger still lingered faintly in David's memory, a reminder that even brief relief comes at a price. As the morning sun began to push back the shadows, David tucked the wallet deeper into his coat pocket. The weight of it seemed heavier than it had the night before, as if the moral burden inside had doubled. He had barely slept, haunted by guilt and uncertainty. Today, he had to decide. Would he return the wallet or continue down a path he swore he'd never take? David leaned against the cold bridge support, the cement biting into his back through his worn-out coat. The city around him was waking up. Commuters rushing to catch buses, cars honking as they navigated the narrow streets, and pedestrians carrying their morning coffees without a glance in his direction. It was another day in a world that moved too fast for people like him. Clenching his fists, David whispered to himself, "You're not a thief. You don't have to be." But that wasn't entirely true anymore. He had spent $20, and no amount of justifying it would change that fact. It gnawed at him. He had told himself it was necessary, even harmless. Yet deep down, he knew this was a test, a moment that would define the kind of man he was becoming. David forced himself to his feet, groaning as his joints cracked from the cold. The wallet was still tucked safely inside his coat, but now it felt like a time bomb, each tick of guilt reminding him of the countdown to a choice. He pulled it out and stared at the ID again. Charles Albright. The name felt almost alien to David. This man lived a life so far removed from David's own. It was hard to imagine they shared the same planet. "All right, Lawson," David muttered under his breath. "Time to make this right." He resolved to find Albright, no matter what. But first, he needed a plan. Returning the wallet wasn't just a matter of dropping it off at some fancy office building. He had to prepare for what came next. The $5 he earned last night from hauling crates wouldn't make up for the missing $20, but it was something. If he could earn a bit more today, maybe sweep a sidewalk, clean some windows, or take on another odd job, he'd at least feel a little less ashamed when handing the wallet back. There was no way of knowing how Albright would react, but David knew that if he didn't try, he'd never forgive himself. As David walked the streets of Newark, he scanned every store and restaurant window for opportunities. Most places ignored him outright, brushing him off with polite refusals, or worse, dismissive glares. "Sorry, we're not hiring right now." "No, we don't need help. We already have someone for that." Each rejection stung more than the last, but David pressed on. He wasn't going to give up that easily, not today. At a gas station on the corner of Bloomfield Avenue, he noticed an older man struggling to unload cartons of bottled water from the back of a delivery truck. David hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. "Need some help with those?" he asked, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. The man wiped his forehead with a handkerchief and gave David a once-over. "You look like you could use a few bucks." "Sure, why not? Help me stack these inside, and I'll see what I can spare." Grateful, David got to work, moving faster than he thought his body was capable of. The cartons were heavy, but each one he carried felt like a small victory. He pushed himself, driven by more than just the promise of a few dollars. This was his chance to prove, even to himself, that he could do the right thing. After 30 minutes of backbreaking work, the delivery man handed David a crumpled $10 bill. "It's not much," the man said with a tired smile, "but it's what I got." David accepted it with a grateful nod. It wasn't the full $20 he needed to replace, but now he was only $5 short. He folded the bill carefully and tucked it into his pocket alongside the other $5. Determined to earn the last bit he needed, David made his way down to the waterfront district. He had heard from other homeless men that the tourist boats sometimes needed help with quick cleaning jobs between tours. If he could land one of those, it might be just enough. When David arrived at the docks, he spotted a crew preparing to board a tour boat. The boat's exterior gleamed in the sunlight, but the crew looked hurried and short-handed. Seizing the opportunity, David approached a young woman in a crisp uniform. "Hey, you need some help cleaning up?" he asked. "I'll work fast. Just need to make a few bucks." The woman gave him a skeptical look, but the pressure of getting the boat ready seemed to override her doubts. "All right," she said. "There's a mop and bucket by the dock. If you can clean the deck before the next group boards, I'll give you $10. David nodded and got to work, scrubbing the deck as quickly as he could. His hands ached, and sweat dripped from his brow, but he didn't stop. He had a goal, and nothing, not even exhaustion, was going to stop him. By the time he finished, the deck was spotless, and the woman handed him the promised $10 bill. "Nice job," she said with a nod. David thanked her, slipping the bill into his pocket with the others. Relief washed over him. He had done it. He had replaced the $20. Now, all that was left was to find Charles Albright and return the wallet. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, David made his way to the nearest train station. The address on the ID card was on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, a far cry from the streets of Newark. He didn't have enough for a ticket, but he could try asking for help. The train station was busy with commuters rushing to catch their trains, and David stood awkwardly near the entrance, unsure of how to approach anyone. Finally, he spotted a young woman standing by the ticket machine, fumbling with her bag. Taking a deep breath, David approached her cautiously. "Excuse me," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need to get to Manhattan, but I don't have enough for a ticket. Could you spare a couple of dollars?" The woman hesitated for a moment, then reached into her purse and handed him a $5 bill. "Here," she said with a kind smile. "I hope things get better for you." David's throat tightened with emotion as he accepted the money. "Thank you," he whispered. With the last bit of change, David purchased a train ticket to Manhattan. As the train rumbled toward the city, he clutched the wallet tightly in his hands, the leather warm against his palm. The rhythmic clatter of the train tracks seemed to echo the beat of his racing heart. He had no idea how Charles Albright would react when a homeless man showed up at his door with his wallet. But no matter what happened next, David knew he had done the right thing. For the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, today would be the start of something new. When the train pulled into Grand Central Station, David stepped off and took a deep breath. The city seemed overwhelming, its streets bustling with energy and noise. But he was here. He had made it. Now, all that was left was to find Charles Albright and return what rightfully belonged to him. And whatever came next, whether it was gratitude, indifference, or anger, David was ready to face it. For the first time in years, he felt like a man with purpose. At the door of two worlds, the vast streets of Manhattan swallowed David whole. Towering skyscrapers loomed over him like silent judges, as if aware of the invisible boundary he was about to cross. This wasn't Newark. This was a different world altogether. Here, people hurried with purpose, their polished shoes clicking against the pavement, their coats tailored, their eyes glued to phones or lost in thought. No one noticed David, a stranger carrying the heavy weight of both a stolen $20 and a flicker of redemption. The ID in the wallet led him to an address on the Upper West Side. It wasn't just any neighborhood. This part of Manhattan boasted luxury apartments and ornate brownstones, far beyond anything David could comprehend. As he made his way through streets lined with well-kept trees and quiet cafes, doubt began to seep in. What will a guy like Albright think when someone like me knocks on his door? Will he believe me? Will he care? David adjusted the collar of his fraying coat, suddenly hyper-aware of every rip and stain. He hadn't noticed it before, but now the difference between him and the people around him felt like a canyon he couldn't bridge. Yet, despite the fear gnawing at him, he kept walking. The wallet in his pocket was more than just an object. It was a tether to the man he wanted to be, a man who didn't take the easy way out. When David finally reached the building, he stopped at the base of a stone staircase leading up to an apartment complex that looked more like a small palace. Marble columns flanked the entrance, and an ornate iron gate stood open, as if beckoning him inside. A doorman, dressed in a crisp black suit, stood at attention, greeting passersby with professional nods. David hesitated, running his fingers over the smooth leather of the wallet. "Here goes nothing," he whispered. He took a deep breath and approached the gate, trying to seem as calm as possible. As he neared, the doorman gave him a quick glance, his neutral expression faltering for just a moment, enough to betray a flicker of suspicion. "Can I help you?" the doorman asked, his tone polite but edged with caution. David swallowed hard. "Yeah, I found this wallet," he said, pulling it from his pocket. "It belongs to Charles Albright. I wanted to return it." The doorman's eyes narrowed slightly, but he kept his expression controlled. "You found it?" David nodded. "Yeah, in Newark." He paused, realizing how that must sound. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to give it back." For a moment, the doorman didn't say anything. Then, with a small nod, he picked up the phone at his side and dialed a number. "Mr. Albright, there's someone here. Says he found your wallet." David shifted nervously as the doorman listened to the response. After a brief exchange, the doorman hung up and gave David a look that was neither hostile nor warm. "You can come up. 3rd floor, Apartment 3B. The elevator ride felt like a journey through time, each floor a reminder of how far removed David was from this world. The interior was spotless, lined with brass accents and mirrors that reflected his worn-out appearance back at him. He looked like someone who didn't belong here, but he wasn't here to belong. He was here to do the right thing. When the elevator doors slid open, David stepped out into a quiet, carpeted hallway. He found the door to 3B and stared at it for a long moment. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a question. What if he accuses me of stealing? What if he slams the door in my face? But there was no turning back now. David raised his hand and knocked. The sound echoed down the empty hallway, amplifying his anxiety. After a few moments, the door opened, revealing a man in his late 40s. Charles Albright stood there, dressed casually in a light sweater and slacks, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed. He looked like the kind of person who rarely encountered problems beyond a missed meeting or a delayed dinner reservation. "Can I help you?" Albright asked, his expression curious but guarded. David held out the wallet. "I found this. It's yours, right?" Albright's eyes flicked to the wallet, then back to David. A mix of surprise and suspicion crossed his face. He took the wallet from David's hand and opened it, inspecting the contents. His credit cards and ID were still there, but the missing cash was noticeable. David tensed, waiting for the inevitable accusation. I spent $20, David admitted before Albright could say anything. "I was hungry. I'm sorry, but I replaced it. Here." He pulled out the crumpled bills he had earned and held them out. "It's all there." Albright stared at the money for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to David's surprise, he shook his head slowly. "Keep it." David blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "What?" "I said keep it," Albright repeated, his voice softer this time. He let out a small sigh and ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I don't know how my wallet ended up in Newark, and frankly, I don't care. But the fact that you came all the way here to return it, that means something." David shifted awkwardly, not knowing what to say. He had braced himself for anger, not kindness. Albright seemed to sense his discomfort. "What's your name?" he asked. David Lawson." "Well, David," Albright said, slipping the wallet into his pocket, "you didn't have to do what you did. Most people wouldn't have." David shrugged. I didn't want to be that guy. Not anymore." Albright studied him for a moment, as if weighing a decision. "Are you looking for work?" he asked suddenly. David blinked, caught off guard. Yeah. I'll do anything. I just need a chance." Albright nodded thoughtfully. "I know someone who might be able to help. A friend of mine runs a small business. Nothing glamorous, but it's honest work. I can make a call if you're interested." David felt a lump form in his throat. "You'd do that? For me?" Albright smiled, and for the first time, it felt genuine. "Yeah, David, I would. Everyone deserves a second chance." As David left the building, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter than it had in years. The city streets no longer seemed so daunting, and the noise around him felt like the hum of possibility rather than chaos. He had done the right thing. And for the first time in a long time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. With Albright's words echoing in his mind, David allowed himself to hope. Not just for a job, but for a future. A future where the man he wanted to be wasn't just a distant dream, but someone real. Someone worthy. Threads of trust. David stood outside the building for a moment, taking in the chilly air. The overwhelming mixture of relief and disbelief settled in slowly, like the fog lifting after a storm. A second chance. Albright's words still rang in his ears. It was such a simple offer, a lifeline in the murky waters of a life that seemed destined to drown him. Was it real, though? Or would it just be another dead end? He had been disappointed so many times before. Promises that fell through, broken trust, and hopes smashed by reality. Yet, for the first time in a long while, there was a sliver of something unfamiliar. Optimism. Not the flashy kind, but the kind that settles quietly, planting itself in your chest without asking. As he walked down the street, the fear he'd lived with for years, fear of being ignored, of being treated as worthless, began to melt. The small wad of bills Albright had refused still felt strange in his pocket, but David let it be. He didn't need to spend it, not yet. Just knowing that it was there was enough. Enough to remind him that someone saw him, even if only for a moment. The next day, David waited nervously by the phone at a grimy diner, nursing a cup of black coffee he could barely afford. The atmosphere smelled of burnt toast and fryer grease, but David didn't mind. This place was like every other corner of the world he knew, unremarkable, and filled with people scraping by. He had given Albright his number before leaving the previous day, though he hadn't expected much to come of it. Yet here he was, hoping against hope that the stranger's kindness would turn into something more. Please don't be a dead end. Not this time. His phone buzzed loudly on the cracked formica table. He snatched it up, nearly knocking over his coffee. Hello. David Lawson. The voice on the other end was brisk, a woman's. This is Sophie Harris. I run a small construction supply company. Mr. Albright spoke highly of you and said you were looking for work. David's heart skipped a beat. Yes, Mom, I am. I'll take anything. Delivery runs, warehouse work, whatever you've got. Sophie chuckled softly, her voice losing some of its sharpness. We've got an opening for an assistant at our distribution center in Queens. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. Can you come by tomorrow at 8 a.m. for a trial shift? Absolutely. I'll be there. Good. And David, don't make me regret trusting you. David swallowed hard. I won't. I promise. As he ended the call, he allowed himself a small, rare smile. A job. A real shot. It wasn't much, but it was a start, something to anchor him in the storm. The next morning, David stood outside the Queen's warehouse, feeling both nervous and determined. The industrial building was large and a bit rundown, with faded signs and stacks of shipping crates lining the lot. A cold wind whipped through the streets, biting into his thin coat, but he didn't care. Inside, he was met by Sophie Harris, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a gray ponytail. She wore jeans and a company jacket, and her handshake was firm. You show up on time. That's a good start, she said, giving him an appraising look. David worked hard that first day, harder than he had in years. He moved boxes, tracked inventory, and handled deliveries without complaint. His muscles ached by lunchtime, but the ache felt good, like a reminder that he was earning his way back into the world. The other workers were wary at first, eyeing him like an outsider. David could feel the judgment in their glances, but he didn't let it bother him. He knew how people saw guys like him, down-and-out drifters with too many excuses and too few solutions. But today, he didn't feel like that man anymore. Today, he was someone new. As the shift ended, Sophie called him into her office, a small cluttered space with filing cabinets and paperwork scattered everywhere. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. You worked hard today, Lawson. But here's the thing. Lots of people work hard on their first day. It's the ones who show up the next day, and the day after that, who stick around. David nodded, meeting her gaze. I'll show up. She studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. Good. You're on probation for the first 2 weeks. Screw up, and you're out. But if you keep your nose clean, we'll make it official. David couldn't help but grin. Thank you, Miss Harris. I won't let you down. She gave him a half-smile in return, the first crack in her tough exterior. We'll see. In the following days, David found himself adjusting to a routine he hadn't experienced in years. Waking up early, clocking in on time, and working long shifts alongside people who didn't trust him yet, but were slowly warming to him. It wasn't easy, but each day felt like a small victory, a step away from the man he used to be, and toward the man he wanted to become. There were moments, of course, when doubt still crept in, when exhaustion set in, and he wondered if he was fooling himself. What if I mess this up too? What if I don't deserve this chance after all? But then he'd remember Albright's words, "Everyone deserves a second chance." Those words became a mantra, a lifeline he clung to when things got tough. And little by little, things did get better. The crew started calling him by his first name. Sophie gave him more responsibilities, and for the first time in a long time, David felt like he belonged somewhere, not just in a job, but in a community. One evening after a long shift, David found himself sitting on the steps outside the warehouse, watching the sun dip below the skyline. The sky was a swirl of oranges and purples, the kind of beauty that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled $20 he had earned that first day. He had held on to it, not because he needed it. He was earning his own money now, but because it represented something far more valuable, a reminder of the man he had chosen to be. With a small smile, David slipped the bill back into his pocket. He knew there was still a long road ahead, plenty of mistakes to avoid and trust to earn. But for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. This time, he wouldn't just survive. He'd build something real, something that lasted. And with every step forward, the weight of his past grew lighter, until it was nothing more than a shadow trailing behind him, fading into the distance. The challenge within. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, David settled into his new life. The warehouse became a second home, filled with familiar faces and the steady rhythm of hard work. He formed bonds with his coworkers, sharing jokes over lunch and discussing their lives during the lulls in the busy schedule. The laughter that echoed through the building felt foreign but delightful, a sound he hadn't heard in far too long. Sophie Harris was a tough boss, but David learned to appreciate her candid feedback and no-nonsense attitude. She pushed him to be better, to go beyond what he thought he was capable of. And slowly, he started to see the fruits of that labor. He was becoming someone he could respect, a worker, a friend, a man with purpose. But the shadows of his past weren't easily dismissed. They lingered like ghosts, occasionally surfacing when David least expected it. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, he was making his way home when he crossed paths with a group of men loitering on a corner. They were familiar faces, reminders of a life he had tried to leave behind. "Look who it is," one of them called out, a man named Ricky who had once been a part of David's former life. The big shot in the warehouse. "You think you're too good for us now." David felt the knot in his stomach tighten. He had worked so hard to distance himself from those days. The thrill of camaraderie had been enticing then, but he now understood that it had come at a steep price. He took a deep breath, his heart racing. "Ricky, I don't have time for this," he replied, trying to keep his tone steady. "I've got work to do." "Oh, I see how it is. You've traded us in for a new life. Ha! Too good for your old friends." Ricky stepped closer, his gang of followers closing ranks around David. David's instincts screamed at him to walk away, to keep moving toward the safety of his new life. But the weight of their judgment pressed down on him. What if they were right? What if he really was just a coward, running away from who he truly was? "You think you can just walk away?" Ricky pressed. "You owe us, man. You were one of us." "No," David said firmly, feeling the heat rising in his chest. "I was a part of a life that was dragging me down. I'm not that guy anymore, Ricky. I'm done with all that." Laughter erupted from the group, harsh and mocking. "Done with all that? You think you're better than us? You think you're better than the street?" David felt a surge of anger and fear, his pulse quickening. In that moment, he realized that this wasn't just about them. It was about him. He was fighting for his future, and that future was worth defending. He squared his shoulders and met Ricky's gaze. "I'm not better than you. he said, voice steady and loud enough to cut through the noise. I'm just trying to be better for myself. For a moment, the tension hung in the air. David stood there, heart racing, fully aware of the danger of his defiance. He felt exposed, like a tightrope walker on the edge of a great fall. But he held his ground. Whatever you say, man, Ricky said, his bravado faltering just a touch. You're just another nobody, pretending to be somebody. Maybe, David said, taking a step back, but I'm a nobody who's trying to build something. Good luck with your life. With that, he turned and walked away, not looking back. Each step felt like a small victory, as if he were reclaiming pieces of himself that he thought had been lost forever. The next day, the confrontation played on repeat in David's mind, a heavy weight pressing down on him. He arrived at the warehouse earlier than usual, determined to shake off the remnants of fear that clung to him like cobwebs. As he worked, the hum of activity filled the space. Sophie was in her office, the door open, and he could hear her barking orders and answering phone calls. He admired her strength and resilience, and knew he had much to learn from her. During lunch, David found himself seated with a few coworkers, including Maria, a woman with a quick laugh and an easy smile. She had a way of making even the longest days feel lighter. You look like you've seen a ghost, Maria said, glancing up from her sandwich. Everything okay? David hesitated, unsure if he wanted to open up about the encounter with Ricky and the others. But something in her warm gaze made him trust her. I ran into some old friends last night. They weren't very happy to see me. Maria frowned, her brows furrowing with concern. What do you mean? They didn't take too kindly to me leaving, he admitted. They think I owe them something. Do you? She asked, her tone serious yet gentle. No. I mean, I used to think I did. But I don't owe anyone anything if it means losing myself again. She nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. It's hard to cut ties. It feels like you're losing a part of yourself. I know, he replied, a wave of gratitude washing over him. But I'm learning to let go. This job, it means everything to me. Maria smiled, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Then hold on to it. You're doing great, David. Just remember, you're not alone. We're all in this together. Her words sank in, a lifeline thrown into his turbulent sea of emotions. For the first time in a long time, David felt supported, not just by Sophie and the others, but by a sense of belonging that he had been missing. Weeks passed, and David settled into a rhythm at the warehouse, the steady flow of work grounding him. But he knew the confrontation with his past wasn't over. One night, as he left work, he caught sight of Ricky and his crew across the street. This time, David felt a rush of defiance, not fear. Ricky spotted him too and waved a hand. Look who it is, the warehouse king. David's heart pounded, but he stood firm. He was not the scared boy he once was. He had built something here, and no one could take that away from him. Yeah, it's me, he called back, keeping his voice steady. And I'm not looking back. Ricky scoffed, stepping forward with his friends in tow. You think you can just ignore us? You don't belong here, Lawson. Maybe I don't belong with you, David replied, taking a deep breath. But I found my place, and it's not with people who bring me down. Laughter erupted again, but this time it felt hollow. The crew's jeers had lost their bite. David realized then that the power dynamic had shifted. He was no longer a pawn in their game. He was the player, and he refused to be pushed around. With each word, he felt more confident. I'm building a new life for myself. You can either join me in this journey or be left behind. The choice is yours. The atmosphere shifted slightly, tension replaced by something more akin to uncertainty. Ricky glared, unsure of how to respond. The group's laughter faded, and for a moment, they simply stood there, staring. Whatever, man, Ricky finally said, turning to leave. You'll see, you'll come crawling back. David watched as they walked away, the weight of their judgment lifting from his shoulders. It was a small victory, but one that felt monumental. He had stood his ground, refusing to let the ghosts of his past dictate his future. The next day, David approached Sophie during a lull in the workday. "I wanted to thank you," he began, feeling the surge of appreciation. "For believing in me and giving me this chance. I know it's not easy to take on someone like me." Sophie raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "What do you mean, someone like you?" "Someone with a history, someone who used to." He hesitated, trying to find the right words. "Someone who used to mess things up." She nodded, leaning back in her chair. "We all have histories, David. It's what you do with them that counts. You can't change your past, but you can shape your future." Her words resonated deeply within him. David had been focused on his past and how it defined him. But Sophie was right. He could choose to shape his future, and he was already doing just that. "Thank you," he said sincerely, a warmth spreading through him. "I appreciate you giving me this chance." Sophie's lips curled into a rare smile. "Just keep doing what you're doing. You're making progress. And remember, if you ever feel lost, come talk to me. I've been where you are." That evening, as David left work, he felt lighter. Each step was a step away from the shadows of his past, closer to a future filled with hope and potential. He glanced back at the warehouse, a sense of pride swelling within him. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving, one day at a time. As he walked home, the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city. For the first time in a long while, David felt a flicker of excitement about the journey ahead. He knew the road would be fraught with challenges, but now he felt equipped to face them. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." And with that thought, he stepped forward into the night, embracing the unknown that lay ahead. The rising tide. As the weeks turned into months, David found his footing in the new rhythm of life at the warehouse. Each day brought challenges, but he embraced them with a vigor he hadn't known before. He became a reliable presence among his coworkers, often staying late to help with projects and learning every aspect of the operations. The warehouse was no longer just a job. It was a community, and he felt a deep sense of loyalty to the people around him. One afternoon, while sorting through boxes in the back, Sophie approached him with a clipboard in hand. "David, I want you to lead the next team meeting," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "Me?" he replied, a hint of disbelief creeping into his voice. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," she confirmed. "You've earned it. The team respects you, and I think they'd benefit from your perspective." He took a deep breath, feeling both exhilarated and anxious. The idea of standing in front of everyone, sharing his thoughts, was daunting, but it also sparked a sense of excitement. "Okay, I'll do it," he said, determination setting in. As he prepared for the meeting, David reflected on his journey. He spent hours organizing his thoughts, drafting an agenda, and thinking about what he wanted to convey. He wanted to inspire his coworkers, just as Sophie had inspired him. The day of the meeting arrived, and David felt a whirlwind of emotions swirling within him. The conference room buzzed with chatter as he stepped inside, the familiar faces of his coworkers turning to him. For a moment, he felt like the old David, the unsure, timid man who would have shied away from this opportunity. But as he looked around, he saw the support in their eyes, and the doubt began to dissipate. "Hey, everyone," he started, his voice steady but slightly shaky. "Thanks for coming. I know we all work hard, and sometimes it feels like the days blend together. But I want to take a moment to celebrate what we've accomplished as a team." The room quieted, and he continued, speaking from the heart. "When I first started here, I was a mess. I was lost, and I didn't know if I could find my place. But you all welcomed me in, and that made a difference. Together, we've faced challenges and hit targets, and it's because of each one of you." As he spoke, he could see the glimmers of pride in their eyes, a sense of belonging that reinforced his message. "I believe we can do even more. We have the potential to not just meet our goals but to exceed them. I want to hear your ideas. What can we do to improve our workflow? How can we support each other better? To his surprise, the response was immediate. Ideas flowed freely from his coworkers, each suggestion sparking further discussion. They spoke about optimizing inventory systems, improving communication, and even planning team-building activities outside of work. David listened intently, encouraging everyone to share their thoughts. As the meeting wrapped up, he felt a surge of accomplishment. They had not only discussed improvements, but had bonded over shared goals. His coworkers left the room energized, and David felt a deep sense of pride in what they had achieved together. Over the next few weeks, the changes they discussed began to take root. David spearheaded the implementation of a new inventory management system that streamlined their processes, reducing errors and improving efficiency. The team worked together seamlessly, and the atmosphere in the warehouse shifted from merely functional to collaborative and supportive. But as their success grew, so did the attention they drew from other companies. Sophie received inquiries about their operations and processes, and soon enough, the warehouse became a case study for other businesses looking to improve their own efficiency. One evening, as David was finishing up some paperwork, Sophie called him into her office. "David, I need to discuss something important," she said, her expression serious. He sat down, a knot of anxiety forming in his stomach. "What's going on?" "We've been approached by a major logistics company interested in partnering with us. They want to bring in additional resources and expand our operations," she explained. "That sounds great, right?" he replied, trying to mask his nervousness. "It could be, but it also means changes. They want to implement stricter protocols and potentially bring in new management," she continued. "I'm not sure how it will impact our team." David's heart sank. He had worked so hard to build the sense of community in the warehouse, and the thought of losing that felt unbearable. "What are we going to do?" Sophie leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed. "I think we need to approach this as a team. If we stand united, we can voice our concerns and advocate for what we believe in. I'm not willing to let anyone come in and dismantle what we've built." Her words reignited the fire within him. "We should hold a meeting and discuss this openly. Everyone deserves to know what's happening, and we need to strategize." Sophie nodded, a spark of approval lighting her eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that. Let's do it tomorrow." The following day, the atmosphere in the warehouse was tense as David gathered everyone for the emergency meeting. He could feel the apprehension in the air as he prepared to address his coworkers. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," he began, glancing around the room. "I know we've been on a great journey together, and I don't want to jeopardize what we've built. I'm here to share some news about potential changes coming our way." The murmurs began, and David raised his hands to quiet them down. "Sophie has been approached by a logistics company interested in partnering with us. This could mean growth, but it could also lead to changes in our operations and management." "Are they going to fire people?" Maria asked, her voice laced with concern. "We don't know for sure," David replied, trying to quell the fear in the room. "But it's important that we discuss this openly. We need to be proactive and ensure that our voices are heard." Sophie stepped in, supporting David. "We've built something special here, and I don't want anyone to feel like they're just a number in a big corporation. If we stand together, we can make our voices heard and advocate for our team." The room buzzed with chatter, a mix of worry and determination. They discussed their options, focusing on what they valued about their work environment, the camaraderie, the support, and the sense of community they had cultivated. After the discussion, they decided to draft a collective letter to the logistics company, outlining their concerns and emphasizing the importance of maintaining their unique culture. David felt a sense of empowerment as they worked together, each person contributing to the letter, making it a true representation of their collective voice. As they finalized the letter, David felt a rush of adrenaline. They were fighting for something that mattered, something worth preserving. They sent the letter off, unsure of how the logistics company would respond but hopeful that their message would be received. Days turned into a week, and the waiting became unbearable. Tensions were high, and there was a lingering uncertainty that hung over the warehouse. David tried to keep morale up, organizing team lunches and encouraging everyone to stay focused. Then, one afternoon, Sophie called an all-hands meeting. David's heart raced as he walked into the conference room, the air thick with anticipation. Everyone settled in, eyes glued to Sophie as she began to speak. "I appreciate all of your hard work and dedication during this time," she said, her voice steady. "We received a response from the logistics company regarding our letter." The room fell silent, everyone leaning in closer. "They've agreed to a meeting with our team to discuss our concerns," she announced. "They want to hear directly from us about what we value and how we envision our partnership." A wave of relief washed over the group, and David felt a surge of pride. "That's great news," he exclaimed, and applause broke out in the room. Sophie smiled, her eyes shining with determination. "But we need to prepare. We need to present a united front and articulate our vision clearly." David stepped forward, feeling a sense of purpose wash over him. "I'll help coordinate the meeting. We need to outline our main points and practice our delivery. This is our chance to show them who we are and what we stand for." With renewed energy, the team dove into preparations. They discussed their values, their successes, and their vision for the future. The sense of unity that had grown in the warehouse became a powerful driving force. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. David, Sophie, and a few other representatives stood in front of a long table filled with executives from the logistics company. The tension was palpable as they prepared to present their case. Sophie opened the meeting, introducing their team and sharing the essence of their letter. David felt a mix of nerves and excitement as he prepared to speak. The eyes of the executives were fixed on him as he took a deep breath and began. "Thank you for meeting with us today," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "We want to express our gratitude for considering our concerns. We've worked hard to build a community here, one that values teamwork, support, and integrity." He glanced around the table, making eye contact with each executive. "We believe that any partnership must reflect these values. We want to grow and evolve, but not at the expense of what makes this place special." As he spoke, he could see the executives exchanging glances. Their expressions were thoughtful, and he continued, fueled by the passion of his team behind him. "We've achieved significant milestones, and we believe that a partnership can enhance our capabilities while preserving our culture. We'd like to explore how we can integrate our teams without compromising our values." The meeting flowed with discussion, and David felt the energy shift as the executives responded positively to their vision. They asked questions, engaged in dialogue, and genuinely seemed interested in understanding the warehouse's culture. As the meeting concluded, David felt a sense of relief and accomplishment wash over him. They had made their case and had been heard. Back at the warehouse, the atmosphere was electric. The team gathered to celebrate the successful meeting, a newfound excitement radiating throughout the space. David felt a sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. Sophie raised her glass, to teamwork, to unity, and to the future we're building together. Everyone joined in, their voices echoing in cheers. David looked around at his coworkers, his friends, and felt a wave of gratitude. They had faced uncertainty together, and their resilience had paid off. As the celebration continued, David reflected on how far he had come. The timid man who had once walked through the warehouse doors was gone, replaced by someone who embraced challenges and thrived in the support of a community. In the weeks that followed, negotiations progressed smoothly, and the partnership was formalized in a way that aligned with their values. David took on more responsibilities, becoming a key figure in bridging the two teams, ensuring that the culture of the warehouse remained intact. One evening, as David was cleaning up after a late shift, he received a text from Sophie. "We've got a surprise for you. Meet me in the break room." Curious, he headed to the break room, where he found a small gathering of his coworkers. They were all wearing party hats, and a banner reading "Congratulations, David" hung above the table filled with snacks and cake. "Surprise!" they shouted in unison, and David's heart swelled with warmth. "What's all this?" He laughed, feeling overwhelmed. "You've been a tremendous leader and a source of inspiration for us all," Sophie explained. "We wanted to celebrate everything you've accomplished." David was speechless. The joy and camaraderie in the room reminded him of how much they had all grown together. They shared stories, laughter, and reflections on their journey, each moment reinforcing the bonds they had formed. As the night wore on, David realized that this celebration was not just about him. It was a testament to the resilience of their team, the community they had built, and the bright future that lay ahead. With every slice of cake, every smile, and every word of gratitude shared, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They had overcome challenges, embraced opportunities, and grown together as a family. As David looked around the room, he knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would bring new challenges and opportunities, but he felt confident in facing them. Together, they would rise to any occasion, fueled by their unity, resilience, and the shared belief in their vision. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and friendship, David embraced the journey ahead, ready to navigate the tides of change and forge a brighter future together. The warmth of belonging enveloped him, and he realized that he had finally found his place, not just in the warehouse, but in the world. He raised his glass in a toast, to our journey, to our community, and to the unbreakable bond we formed. Here's to all that we will achieve together. As they clinked glasses and cheered, David felt a profound sense of gratitude and purpose. No matter what lay ahead, he was ready to face it, hand in hand with his newfound family.